Well, hello survivors, hello family and friends. This is Roy from Bootsy Sweetheart's Guide to Life and Other Disappointing Experiences with part 2 of a video I made of making my contribution to the Quilting Marine's domestic violence quilt project, community quilt project. I hope you learn something from this and reach out to organizations that support the victims of domestic violence. Well, welcome back everybody for part 2 of this beautiful block for the Quilting Marine's Love Shouldn't Hurt quilt block community project dealing with support for victims of domestic violence. Now, we had prepared all the fabrics, we prepared the templates. Now let's look at how the fabrics are going to be arranged. Now, if you had seen my first video on paper piecing, you'll see that it's very important that we overlap so that the seams meet in the right place and we don't have to have any kind of wonky sewing. And that will not happen on this particular pattern. You'll see when we're developing it and assembling it how you need two sections. And a lot of paper piecing requires piecing together smaller segments and then joining the big segments. And you'll see in a little bit, excuse me, I get the paper cutter. You'll see in a little bit that this requires two halves put together. And a lot of things with radiate or segments that radiate out from the front, from the center rather, require more than one foundation per block. So what I'm going to do is cut this pattern, the foundation pattern, in half, and you'll see why when we get towards the end. And of course, if you have a pattern that's already made for you, like from Electric Quilt or something, they will already tell you and give you the segments that need to be done. But this one we figured out pretty much easily because it's a circular continuum. So I'm sorry, there was a little issue with focusing and the camera was misbehaving. So anyway, let me get back to this. We are going to lay the first segment here, and then I arbitrarily picked this pattern, this fabric. Now, if you remember from the other quilt, we start with the first piece facing up, and this is like a reverse, so you'll be sewing on the back and the front will be on this side, so it's almost like a reverse image. Now normally you'd have cut out at least approximate templates, so we made some arbitrary rectangles, and I'm going to cut this one in half to start. And let me show you, there's some waste on this, and that's important to mention. I'm not being too careful with this because the center will be cut out to make room for the heart, and I'm making only one block, so I don't have to be too concerned about saving fabric. The other thing is I like making crumb quilts and scrap quilts, so I'll have a lot of little scraps. Now what I'm doing with this first piece is making sure that this overlaps the stitching line. by much more than 1/4 of an inch, at least in the beginning, to get started. And I want to just make sure that over here, do you see here? We need to overlap here as well, because this piece will be sewn to the matching piece, but we'll need the 1/4 inch seam allowance to sew, otherwise the block will be narrower this way and wider that way. So you'll see that as we go along. So I'm placing it sort of in the center, and again making sure that I have more than 1/4 of an inch. And in this case I'm going to pin. Sometimes I tape, sometimes I use glue, but in this case, and I'm going to constantly check this first piece, I'm doing it this way. Okay. Now the next, now I'm going to hold this aside, because we could use this here, which is a big chunk. You see, that's a bigger triangle. But there will be waste, so let me leave this over there and grab one of the other pieces. Now again, here's what's going to happen. We're going to sew and flip so that the wedges will be facing up. The fabric will be right side up. Now here again, we can take the rectangle, and if you remember from the part 1, we didn't really we didn't really measure. And again, it's, you know. Now here, this is going to be kind of an important thing to notice. There are two hypotheses. Wait. Oh, anyway, let's not even go there. Now this has to be face down, you see, and you can see that this is not gonna work. You'll need this piece. Can you see what happened there? If I try to put this, well, let's see. No, this one will work too. Actually, doesn't matter. Either one of them will work. I'm sorry, I figured that out wrong. So anyway, let me put, this is a smaller base, so I want to just make sure the bases are similar. And I'm just going to line these up, making sure that this goes past that center intersection, and double check that when I fold this back, there's going to be more than 1/4 of an inch, and there is not. You see this? Can you see that this is sticking out? So this is not situated properly until we get down, because we need 1/4 of an inch all the way around, and this is not doing that. And I wanted to make sure that I made mistakes as well. So let me try the other piece. Since we didn't measure, we would have needed 8 different templates. Let's see how this one works. Again, we're putting it like this. We need that 1/4 of an inch all the way around, and you'll see here we have it. It's just the way the hypotenuse works. Oh, I got it right, hypotenuse. All right. So now that I know that, let me situate it again. I'm only making this very specific on the first block, because this is kind of where everything else gets lined up with. If this works, then the whole thing will go together much more easily. There we go. All right, I'm going to pin that. Okay. Now, take it to the machine. Just like this, see? And we're going to sew along here. We're going to sew along this line and make sure that the fabric is laying flat. And let me take it to the machine. So, now don't tell me I'm going to have focusing problems with this machine. camera too. I have two cameras going here. Now I start off the template by a bit. Now you see that was lined up originally, and now it's not. Excuse me. There we go. I start a bit off, and remember that here is the end of the stitching. This edge here is going to be this edge is going to be a stitching edge. So we're going to have to go 1/4 of an inch past that at some point. So now I just sew this down. I don't want to make this more difficult than it is because it's really easy. And I don't bother back stitching on this. You may have to pull out a stitch or two. We have a lot of extra, but that'll trim off. Now let me just double check this because we don't want to rip this out if we don't have to. There we go. Now you will take this to the ironing board. I'll just finger press it for now. And now you may want to trim. And trimming here is really important. So remember, we fold back. Again, if you need to go back to my first video, it'll be even clearer. Now here is the seam allowance, which is, this is about a 1/2 inch. And we really only want 1/4 of an inch. So I'm lining this up with the 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to just cut it away. Okay. And this we'd be careful of. I'm not going to cut this yet. This line is a stitching line, which means we must have 1/4 of an inch of fabric here when we get to that last half. So, okay, we want to make sure, so I'm not going to touch this right now, all right? And open it up, and there we are. Perfect, 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 perfect. Now, at this point you can, if you want, fold back here the next segment. I don't usually fold that back, but you can do that. And then all you have to do is line up. You know, you fold it back and trim it if you want to 1/4 of an inch. But I always wait till I get the piece sewn on. This way it's I'm sorry, I'm concentrating here. This way it's 1 step instead of 2 steps. And now we do the same thing here. I'm going to pin. I'm only lining this up with this edge of the purple, the deep purple. See it? I'm not paying too much attention with anything else. And again, I'm looking at the stitching line. I was a little shy there, but we'll fix that. Okay, just a little shy. Okay, you do. Now, take it to the machine. Now, because we don't have a template, we have a lot of fabric left over here. And that's kind of expected because we didn't measure accurately. If you were making a full quilt, where you had to worry about all the intersections in the center there, where the segments come together, then I would suggest making templates. So you had more accuracy. This is not the most accurate way for the center point to meet, because you want that center point to be really sharp. And this case we don't have to be, because we're going to cut it away. Okay, let me take this out. See? Oops, got to get rid of this pin. And we continue around. Again, here we come back like this. Fold back on the line. And you see, we just whack this off 1/4 inch. A little shy there, I'll fix that. And there we go. There. Now remember, again, this is all going to be cut out, so it's a bit forgiving, and I must mess this up a little bit, but you won't see that. Can you see this mistake I made? I think it's good to show my errors. I could have moved this triangle up a little more. I had plenty of meat, as they say, over here, so I should have tested this. But again, if you were doing a quilt where the center was important, this would have to be redone. It doesn't have to be, because our heart is going to go over this. So this particular block is very forgiving. So you continue around like that. You see, then the next piece will go here. You see how it's shaping up? Isn't it pretty? Continue like that all the way around. And when you get to here, remember, you've got to have that quarter. Here's where the mistake I made on the last one. You've got to have that 1/4 inch over here. See? And that's the mistake I made over here. I didn't have I had the triangle too low. You want to make sure that it covers. And you practice folding it. You know, I guess do as I say, not as I do. And to be honest with you folks, I do get nervous on these videos. So anyway, so continue doing that. And we'll be back. So I finished side 1. Those are segments 1 to 8. And again, I want to remind you, this is so important. Got to have 1/4 inch. It's a little shy here, but it's still 1/4 inch. It's a scant, but that's okay. The center is not so bad. I wouldn't want it as a standalone block, but you know, only perfection is only for the gods. And I'm not going to any juried quilt show on this one. You know, I was always wanting to do something like this and felt inferior, that a little bit clumsy, as you may find out. And Teresa, thank you so much for reminding me to close the blade on the paper rotary cutter. And I'm a little awkward and clumsy, so I am also a little careless. But most of what I do turns out pretty good. So I hope you learn what not to do along with what to do. So here is the last section, done exactly the same way. Again, I want to remind you, we want that 1/4 inch. Now you can trim at any point you wish. So I'll trim here, and I'm leaving a good 1/2 inch just to be sure on the outside. I'm not sure whether I'll send this to Mark with with the 1/4 inch or with the 1/2 inch left on. I'll see. So here we are, the last piece. Now, do I have to cut another triangle? Oh, nope, I have one right here. I do have to cut the triangle, but... So here's the last piece. Now, you don't have to cut the triangle. That's the point I was going to make before. You can leave this as a rectangle. Let me show you. So I know I have the 1/4 inch here, see? So I can line this rectangle up. Actually, this is a cleaner cut. I can line this up like this. Double check that it'll cover, and it will. I'll pin. Oh, here's another pitfall if you're not careful. Can you see where I'm not lined up there? You want to make sure. Yep, you want to make sure it's lined up. Even a little distortion can make the segment short. All right. Come over to the machine. Sorry for my big hand. I actually have the knee lift, but it's a little out of place here. And this is the last segment. This machine has both a knee lift and a foot cutter, which is nice. Now, I'm going to press this. The iron is off to the side. Just because it's the last piece and I want to make sure there are no distortions. It's a quick little press. Now look at the mess on the back, but it really isn't a mess. So if I continue my seam allowance here, I'll be generous. You can see it's all lined up. And you'll see now that I have it. I have the wedge for another segment cut out. I didn't have to cut that rectangle in half. And here again, I'm going to cut a good 1/2 inch just to be sure. And now you get the feeling of what it's going to look like. This is the prize here, okay? And you see this, don't worry about that. We're going to square it up. We are going to square it up. This one side was a little bit bigger than the other side. Sorry for that. The most important thing is now you can see that had we sewn all around, let's get this over here. Had we sewn all around, we'd be stuck now here at the end with how do you sew these together? Because they have to go together like this, you see? You'd have to sew down here, which is not impossible, but it gets a little awkward. You could do that. I don't advise it, but you could. So dividing it in half solves that problem. Now all we have to do is line up the paper. Forget about all the fabric for a second. Forget about the fabric. We're going to line up the paper. That's the crucial piece. So here's the corner of the paper, and there's the corner of the paper, and we're going to line that up. Okay. You want to make doubly sure. I can see, it may be hard for you to see it. but the corners of the paper are lined up there, and I'll pin it. I use magnets a lot. My pins all get magnetized. Okay, so we've got that. Now here again, it looks all kinds of wonky. Don't worry about the fabric. All we're concerned about is that, let me show you this way, that this corner here matches that corner there on the paper. And once that happens, everything will be in place. Just don't move, don't move, don't move. Now there's a little tear in the paper, and I wasn't sure if this was going to work, this paper. But it's, yeah, that just got pulled out. That's not bad. Now this becomes the stitching line. This is the stitching line. And that's why we needed that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, back to the sewing machine. I cut the paper a little bit, but I'm not worried about that. And try not to sew the paper, but if you do, it doesn't. For this particular block, doesn't matter. Now, here's where we're going to have a little issue because the paper separated. So I want to make sure the paper stays together. Okay, and here we go. Take out the pin as we get to it. And there we are. Now, this should be okay. Famous last words. Oops. Let me see. Let me take a peek. Okay, for what we need, this is fine. Let me just give it a quick press. Be right back. Okay. Here we are. Now I will square this up later. This is much larger than what's needed. And because there are no, oh, I'm loving this. And again, you see, this would get me a U, an unsatisfactory, a big F in the juried quilt world. But this is all going to be away, cut away. Oh, I like this. That's nice when you please yourself. So anyway, let's move on to the next part. I'm going to leave the paper on also, just to keep it stable. There are a lot of bias edges here, and the fabrics aren't exactly the same weight. They're a little, well, the purple is a little heavier. Not much, but enough that I would worry about distortion at this point. This is going to look very nice when it's quilted. So next we take a look at the heart. I'm not too happy with not squaring it up. So I just whacked off one side. All the excess is gone. That's 1/4 of an inch there. And I was going to do this later, but it was annoying me visually, and I was afraid it might throw off. Oh, wait a second. Concentrate, Roy. It might throw off my placement of the center heart. So all you do, because you have the paper left on there, is line the 1/4 of an inch. Oops, you can't see that. The 1/4 of an inch mark on the ruler with the paper. And you'll have a square, in this case, 12.5 inch unfinished block. And you'll see that it looks nicer that I did this. It's not as distracting to look at if it's not wonky. Okay, let's take a look. Did I do this one? It looks like I did not do this one. That was close though. This one's close. It's the, as we say in Queens, New York, where I grew up, smidgens, just a smidgens. Let's see how this looks now. Now, isn't that better? Oh, goodness. All right. Well, the hardest part for me was deciding what to do about the fabric for the heart. So you remember the first heart that I used was paper, and it was small because it was the original one. I can't find the template. And I got it in my head that using this purple heart material might be a nice center for the quilt block. So I put that like that. What do you think? Well, I think it disappears. So I thought maybe the scale was too big. Alright, so I made a smaller heart. And by the way, I'm lining up, here's my fancy pointer, I'm lining up the center of the heart with the seam line and the point of the heart with this seam line. Again, washed out. So now I looked in my stash and I came up with some fabrics, and I found this one I thought might be nice, and I put this down. I made a heart out of it. You can see that it needs another fabric. It can't have one of these fabrics. It would not do well. But I didn't like this. And then I just happened to find what I think is going to go very well with it. Can you see the sparklies? Sparklies. And it's dark. It's a beautiful rich color, and it's got a sheen to the fabric. And I decided that I'm going to make the heart out of this. And it'll be really, really pretty. It's a little, well, no, it's as heavy as this. No, these two fabrics are the same weight. So this should be fine. So at this point I'm going to walk you through how I made the heart center. By the way, these I could have used because they're finished, and I'll show you how I finish this. Applique, make it easy. And of course there's going to be stitching around, so you'll see some outline of it anyway. All right? Now to making the heart and approaching the finish line. One of the fun things about designing your own quilt block is that you can keep changing the design as it morphs into something. And what happened here is originally I had this big heart shaped in the middle, and I liked that. But as I added the fabrics, it started to become like just too overpowering. And then when I actually put this particular fabric down, I said, oh, it really isn't what I was intending. So I tried the smaller one, if you remember. I made a couple of these samples, and I'm beginning to like that proportion. Then when I put that material, I'm starting to like this fabric, by the way. When I put this fabric in the middle on a smaller heart, I said, yeah, this is a better proportion. So then I made a mock-up of the one I really wanted to use, and this just caught my eye, and I like the proportion. I like the sparklies. So let me show you how we did this. If you look on the samples that I made, I have muslin. This is actually an old bed sheet material fabric. So I have muslin on the backs. We could do what's called needle turn, or we could do raw edge applique, but this is going to be used, so raw edge is not, for me, the best decision and the best way to do this. So I'm going to do the tried and true method that I use often, and I'll show you how that works. You actually are going to cut this away at some point. Or we can leave it in the quilt. It depends on how it feels. We don't want a lot of bulk in. So what we do is get 2 pieces of fabric. Now, normally what I would do is take a piece of muslin, take the fashion fabric, the main fabric, face down, and sew the outline of the image. And the muslin helps to turn, doesn't help, it actually turns the seam under so you don't see it. But because this is a gift and I really want it to be special, I decided that I would use the same fabric for the underside, even though it's going to be cut away. So what I do is cut 2 pieces of the same fabric, in this case, right sides together. I don't know why this camera is being ornery. I cut these a little shy, but we'll make it fit. I don't want to waste too much of this fabric. I only have a little of it. So you can see there's plenty of room. Now you can pin this. You can draw around it and sew on the line. You can use double stick tape. I'm going to glue it with ordinary school glue. And I'm not going to get too close to the edge, even though it doesn't matter, because the school glue, for some reason, doesn't clog up your needle. I don't know what they put in it that doesn't allow it. Everything I sew with glue seems to clog up the needle. This school glue does not. And I'm going to place it on the fabric, making sure I have enough meat under each. And I can actually pin the 2 pieces of fabric together, but this is small enough where I don't think I have to. And all you do is sew around the heart using a very small stitch. Let me go over to the sewing machine and see how this works. Now, I have mine on a, I guess, 2mm setting, very, very slight. For some reason, I like to start on the, oh, I'm sorry, with my arm here. I have the knee lift, which I should use. And the wire is moving the camera. Fix that. Gee, the trials and tribulations of a videographer. Is it still shaking? Sorry about that. Okay. So just a small stitch, and I'm using the edge of the template as my guide. If you clip a little teeny piece of the paper, it doesn't matter, it comes out. And because I'm not making a second one of these, I'm using the template as the line. If I were making a lot of these, I would trace the shape onto the fabric rather than damage the, see, every now and then you have to address it rather than damage the template. Take your time. No, this is not a place where you want to rush unless you're on a straightaway, which I did for a little bit. Now here it gets really crucial because you want some nice sharp corners when you turn it inside out, or right side out rather. Okay, now I'm going to come to the point. Okay, lift the presser foot, and you can see it's not perfect, exact, well, pretty close, and it will work out fine. It's easy. People stress over applique. I mean, it's time consuming, but it doesn't have to be difficult. What's nice about this method is you don't have to turn over the edges. I like hand applique, but you know, this one I want really to be special. And I came to the end. I'm going to just back tack a little. You fine. Cut the thread, and let's see what we have. Well, here we are, sewn. You can hardly see the stitches in the back. I did starch this a little just to make it a little firmer to handle. Now we have to cut away the excess fabric. I'm using pinking shears. You can use regular scissors, but with any curve, you want to have little, as little seam allowance as possible, so that the curve will flow nicely. Now when you get to here, I'm just going to stop short, and I'm going to have to go in with regular scissors there. And I'm a quarter to an eighth of an inch, less than a quarter of an inch to the stitching line. I'm leaving the pattern on so you can see how close to the stitching line I'm getting. But especially for this fabric, it notices it frays a lot, so I'm going to give it a little bit of a generous seam allowance, more so than normal. Here's a little thickness, but that'll be a straight edge part of it. Just on the curves, you really want to be careful. So here we want to get in a little closer to the point of the heart, so that that definition will still be there. Let's see. Okay, now once we've done the clipping, okay, get rid of this. We'll remove the pattern. It comes off very easily. The glue doesn't leave much of a residue, you see. Put that aside. Now here's, this is very important. We want to pull the fabric apart. And because I use the same fabric and the right sides are together, it really doesn't matter which piece I cut. Normally I would cut the muslin, okay, but on this particular project we don't have to. So I'm pulling this out, make sure, pull, make a little clip and reach in. Now I'm making very sure that these fabrics are separated, and for this one I'm going to just make an X. You can actually trim a lot more away, but I'm not going to do that till later, only because I want to ensure that I have sharp edges and sharp turns here. And then we just turn it inside out. Here's where your bone turner and your crease maker, whatever you use. You could use a bamboo, not a bamboo skewer, a chopstick. See how easy this is? And you have a finished edge. It's also a finished edge that matches the main fabric, which is important. Okay, take my bone folder, get all my little edges away here. And I'll take this over to the ironing board and press it. Now, ironing is really important because you want to try to get this top fabric as close to the stitches as possible so that that bottom fabric doesn't show through too much. But it really doesn't matter because it's the same fabric here. If it were the muslin, you'd want to be very careful of that. All right, now we want to get rid of the puckers. Puckers. This will flatten out nicely. Let me go to the iron and press this out. These were my mom's too. I have, there's something very, very special, like with a rolling pin or anything else that a parent used. I have my mother's hammers because she was also she also repaired things in the house. To have something that she held on to, that someone you cherish held on to. Okay, I'll be right back. So here's our heart. Now let's see what it looks like on our block. Try to center it as best I can with the points. And I like this. You don't really see the vibrant purple on the screen as it really is. Oh, I have to fix this. I have it's a little bit of a fold under, see it? I'll move that out. And next will be the machine applique. Stay with me. So what I've done here is pinned the applique where I want it on the main block, and I've chosen an applique stitch that comes with my trusty old Brother machine, and it takes, I think it's 1 bite into the fashion fabric for every 4 stitches, 3 or 4 stitches. There's a little line on my presser foot where I know the needle will stop and it will take a bite just to the left. So I start very slowly. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, over. 1, 2, 3, over. I'm trying to get it to look hand done because I love that look. It's very traditional. Take your time on this. Do not rush this. This is crucial to making, really important to making the applique look neat. Take your time. You don't want to have to pull out any stitches because you'll break the cadence kind of thing, the rhythm of the stitches. Take your time. I have on this machine, even though it's old, I have a setting that can control the speed by which the foot pedal is pressed. I didn't do that. I'm kind of used to this machine and its sensitivity, so I'm paying a lot of attention here to this. I would show you how it's coming out, but I don't want to take it out of the machine at this point. Right at the edge. So it's actually, if you know anything about stitching in the ditch, it's similar in that we're walking right close to the edge. Now this is really pretty, but hand stitching is prettier. Oh, let me never sew over a pin. Well, do as I say, not as I do, kind of thing. Now here I can go a little faster because it's sort of like a straight edge. Now I am keeping my eye on that little mark. I'm not watching the needle. I don't know if you can see it. I'll try. I've got my back to my computer so I can't see. But that little notch is where I'm keeping the edge of the fabric. Not even paying attention to the needle. Because even that little distance from that notch to the needle is enough to distort the stitch and have it bite either into the fabric or too far away from the fabric. Now we get to the corner, lift the presser foot a teeny bit. I'm going to take one more stitch, stop, going to lift the presser foot, turn my work, lining up. Here we go. See, can you see there? It's just not quite lined up. There we go. There we are. Tedious at first, but you'll get really used to it if you're making several of these. I put the pin in. Sorry for my big hands. I put my pin into the wrong direction, but that's okay. Okay, so I can go a little teeny bit faster because I'm sort of like on a straight edge here. Take your time around the curves. Another pin in the wrong direction. Okay. This is where some of us stick our tongue out and hold our tongue out while we sew or cut. Takes practice. I would not do this if this was your first time. I would not do this on your product, on your project. I would wait. Oops, pay attention. I screwed that one up. I would wait till I practiced a bit. Now we're coming to the end. Oh, I was hoping I'd get one more stitch. Well, there's one. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do here, you can see I'm a little off there, but that's okay. I'm going to lift the needle. I'm going to pull the fabric out, and I'm going to snip the threads, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with that in a minute. Let me go back to the table and show you where we are. Okay, so I have these two long ends from where the applique began. Another pin. And what I'm going to do is get a needle and thread, and I'm going to pass them to the back so that I can tie it in a knot, and you won't see the knot on the front. So I just simply, I think this needle is overkill, but I can see it to thread it. And then we just go through to the back, and I'll pull the threads through. I left the fabric, I left the paper on so that I had some meat, you know, almost like a stabilizer. I'm wondering if I should, whoops, I'm wondering if I should leave that on for shipping, sending it over to Mark. But here we go. Here is my block for domestic violence awareness. I hope whoever receives this understands that it's about love spreading out in all directions. And, you know, I'm not a perfectionist, and I suppose if I took time and I wasn't on the video, it would be absolutely perfect. Now, what you can do here is, actually this is not that thick. You know what, let me take some of the paper off. This was unexpected, but let me do this anyway. Yeah, the paper's coming off easily. Now, what you can do is, if you want, if this seems too thick, you can go under. I don't want to do that on this one because it's feeling fine. But see, do the same exact thing as we did with the heart. You pull the fabric away, cut through here, and then cut around the shape of the heart, and then you'll only have one layer of thickness. Should I do that? Do you want me to do that? Oh goodness, oh goodness, oh goodness. All right, let me do that. Either we do it the whole thing correctly, or let's not do it at all, I guess, right? So I did that. I pulled this out, so I know it's not touching here, and I cut through there. I can feel the scissor. They make, I think they call them duck bill scissors. To make this easier, let's see, now you just want to make sure you're just cutting. See, here's the purple. We're just cutting the back layer here. We're not cutting the front purple fabric. Be very careful. This scissors are dangerous for this. I would not use these scissors for this. But let me just do a little for you here. See, this is very thick, so it's probably better that I remove that bulk. And my finger is protecting the applique. See it? Okay. I'm going around and around. Don't get too close. Now, normally you would have a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, but I'm allowing a little bit more. Okay. Come around. Get your hand in there. I'm saying to myself, I'd much rather cut my finger than cut the applique. Well, I don't think that's true, but after all this work, one of the things I learned when we had a personal family, well, thing with domestic violence a while back, was quite often the victim is victimized by the system. And I think that was a lesson hard learned for me, because I was raised to trust the system. And it doesn't always work for you. But, you know, that's a hard lesson to learn. Yeah, oops. I think I'll take the paper off camera. And there, now this is one fabric layer thick. So, this is my finished project. I hope you got something out of this with my carelessness and clumsiness. Just take a little bit of time to pull out the paper. This paper came off better than I expected, so I'm a happy man. If you like this kind of thing, I'll be making all kinds of quilt blocks. There's so many things I want to get into and show you what I like to do. And I'll finish this off. This is tedious. And if you get a chance to check out Mark Darrell's, the Quilting Marines channel, subscribe to him. He's going to be doing a lot of, I hope, I mean, he bit off a lot on this, a lot of videos on social issues. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. Well, thank you for sticking with this long video. I wanted to be pretty detailed in all of the steps that I take when I'm doing a paper piecing of this kind, from design to completion. Again, please reach out to Mark Darrell, the Quilting Marine, and see if there's something you can do to help stem this ever-increasing crisis in America. People getting hurt by people they think love them, because we all know love shouldn't hurt. So until the next time, bye for now.